It's World Environment Day. It's June 5. It's exactly 10 in the morning here in the Philippines. And I'd like to greet all of you. Well, happy planet, happy birthday. Are we actually doing what we need to do to be able to sustain ourselves? What is this all about? We are on Zoom and on Facebook Live. And thanks to my colleagues in the House of Representatives in the Office of Deputy Speaker Legarda, and that's me. And thank you to the Climate Change Commission, which was enacted by law under the Climate Change Act. Well, today we have many things to talk about in just 30 minutes, and I'd like to just start these conversations. We call it Conversations with a Champion. It's not a boxing champ, because as you know, I am not, but we are dealing now with many issues like disaster risk reduction, adaptation, resilience. These are buzzwords that we hear, we read about, and you're wondering perhaps, what does a champion mean? Well, just to be honest, that's a title that has been bestowed on me many years, if not decades ago. And I just want to continue doing the work and to help everyone, rich or poor, rural or urban dweller in the Philippines or in other parts of the world, so that we understand what is a concept of resilience, what is a concept of adaptation, what is a concept of ecological solid waste management, what is the importance of the Clean Air and Clean Water Act, how do we deal with the pandemic, how do we go back to normal? Or is it a new norm? Or is a better normal, which is pending legislation in the Philippines? And so let me just start by talking about what are the existing policies or benchmarks in the Philippines. And there are a lot. And so we're actually 10 steps ahead because we already have very good legislation, which we started way back in the 90s. And for those who don't know me yet, I was a senator in 1998, in 2007 and 2013, having chaired both the Environment and Climate Change Committees and the Foreign Relations Committee and the Finance Committee, where for several years we sort of greened and blued the budget. Again, people may say, what is she talking about? What does greening the budget mean? Okay, let me try to be as simple and as brief as possible, because as I speak now, session in the House of Representatives, where I belong now, no longer in the 24-man and woman Senate of the Philippines, but out of 300 representatives, I now represent my beloved home province, the Lone District of Antique. And for those who are wondering, what is she wearing? What is that beautiful weave on her shoulder? These are hand-woven patadyong textiles, hand-woven in my hometown, Antique, home province, by the rural men and women. Each strand is hand-woven and sewn. I proudly wear this hand-woven textile from Antique called patadyong. So what are these templates or policies or organizations that have worked with us way back in 2007? What is the Asia Pacific Champion for Disaster Risk Reduction? It simply means that when we are prepared, we reduce the risk. For every dollar that we invest in disaster risk reduction, we actually avert losses of more than $5 or $10. In short, it is better to build correctly. It is better to have good roadside ditches. It is best to have rainwater harvesters. It is best to segregate garbage. It is best to use early warning systems, even if it is using indigenous knowledge and not high technology. So it means that when you prepare, when you know the risks, the hazards, and the vulnerabilities, then you reduce the risk. That is the reason why in 2007, it was Feng Min Khan and Salvano Briceño, and eventually it was Margareta Wallström of the United Nations ISDR in Geneva that bestowed the title of Global Champion for Resilience. It simply means, amid all these heavy buzzwords, that we must be able to be resilient, to adapt, to be able to change our lifestyle and avert loss of livelihoods, loss of lives, because we are prepared. You see our ambassador there and Manny de Guzman of the Climate Change Commission. Eventually, we realized that being prepared also means that we are able to adapt. So what does being an adaptation champion mean? The UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, which is based in Bonn in Germany, endorses adaptation programs, which I will talk about more later. But some of these are the creation of rainwater harvesters. Why waste rainwater when we can actually collect it? Why not use indigenous knowledge when it's actually available? Well, in the Philippines, we're fortunate to have enacted many laws. First, the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act, that is one of the issues that we discuss as well in the Global Commission on Adaptation. This is a private NGO headed by no less than Bill Gates and former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, that was launched in the Netherlands. And this representation is one of the commissioners that helped push for these adaptation practices. And so, having said all that, resilience, adaptation, where are we now? There are 10 landmark environmental and climate risk governance laws. Okay, let's see. And I hope those on Facebook would be able to identify. One of my favorite, you see Sonia Mendoza there of the Mother Earth Foundation, who has helped me in its implementation. The law requires every household, barangay, city, local government to ensure that we segregate waste at source, we recycle, and we compost. Why is this so important? Because of the not in my backyard attitude. What is that? We have a problem with landfills. If we just put all our waste together and the garbage collectors per household, per village, per subdivision, per barangay collect it, where will we put all the tons and tons of waste which is not segregated? But if we segregate the waste, meaning food waste, organic waste, dry leaves and twigs, if you put it in a compost pit, then it becomes organic compost. Then we don't have to buy organic fertilizer. Then we're able to do our own fertilizer from organic compost, food waste, dry leaves, aside from using them for mulching, of course. And aside from that, bottles, plastic, tin cans, we can also segregate it and use it as recycled pots. We can use it to gather some water, or we can sell it and have some income. And what cannot be recycled, what cannot be done as organic waste, can be collected. And in many local governments, we see that there's as much as 80% diversion, meaning only 20% of the waste will be collected by garbage. And imagine, I'll repeat, if we did not segregate the waste, 100% will be collected. But if we segregate the waste, up to 80% can be composted, reused, even paper back and forth can be reused, and only 20%, then the problem of environmentally engineered sanitary landfill will no longer be such a big problem. The second, the Philippine Clean Water Act. Way back in 2004, 16 years ago, it provides for the establishment of multi-sectoral governing bodies that manage the quality of our water. In short, please let us not throw our waste, human, infectious, solid, any kind of waste in any body of water. And our water concessionaires must be able to comply with this to make sure that wastewater treatment, septage, sewerage are complied with by local governments. So it seems so big an issue, but it's actually simple. Let's just not throw our waste. No single-use plastics must be thrown in our canals, in our rivers, in our open seas. Let's not even use single-use plastic. So we must not even throw any any amount of garbage on our river systems. They're the source of food. They are the source of life. The fish that we eat. Why would we want to pollute them when life comes from them? Those are two. Now we proceed with another law. The Clean Air Act, which I mentioned earlier, provides for the comprehensive management on air pollution. What are the sources of air pollution? Industry and mobility. Cars, buses, jeeps, motorcycles, all of these must be regulated and not emit toxic fumes. What about those on bicycles? What about those pedestrians? What about the commuters? And so we must promote sustainable pathways, sustainable mobility, so we can have less toxic fumes from my mobile sources. Industries, of course, under the Clean Air Act of 1999. Imagine, it's been so long. And we see the air quality improved during this pandemic. It's unfortunate, the loss of lives and the lockdown of the global economy has affected millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people. But we see that the air has improved. Now, how do we improve the air and the water while returning to work after this pandemic? There's another law, which is the Renewable Energy Act, which is self-explanatory. It promotes the development of RE sources from biomass, solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, and perhaps even ocean energy in the future, and to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. So many laws in the Philippines. We proceed to the next. Oh, this is also self-explanatory. The Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act. What started the pandemic? Was it not the virus from wildlife species? According to science, was it not the transmission from bats, eventually to other animals and humans? That's a question mark. I'm asking that question. And so when we invade the habitat of our wildlife species, when we degrade our wildlife species, when we illegally trade them, which is banned under the law and under certain conventions and international agreements, when we destroy their homes, then they destroy us. Another is a very important measure related to that, and that is the expanded National Environment Awareness and Education Act. It's important to really mainstream all of these in our educational system, whether using social media or online sources or in school, in LGUs, in CHED, and in DepEd. This is mainstream. Another law is, the Climate Change Act created the Commission on Climate Change. Before the creation of this commission and before 2007, when I wrote this law and eventually passed in 2009, I think I can safely say that the issue of climate was hardly ever discussed. Perhaps the late Sonny Alvarez, who started the discussions when I was still a young journalist and he was a senator then. Perhaps only Senator Sonny, perhaps a few voices, but you would never see it in the national budget. You would never see it in discussions on the floor. When I spoke about it in 1998, when I was a young senator, people would say I would not win a seat because people would not understand it. But eventually, the Climate Change Act was enacted, and we have this body, the Climate Change Commission, which mandates that they must help, small as they are, local governments and people's organizations in partnership to mainstream climate change adaptation, mitigation, resilience, risk reduction in the way we live. And another law, this is the funding mechanism where some local governments had already benefited from. I know that the Climate Field School in Mindanao, in Siargao, I think that is in Surigao, had been provided a PSF from achieving all the requirements and being approved by the People's Survival Fund Board, which is headed by the Department of Finance. This is an important piece of legislation that walks our talk. The Climate Change Commission does policy and mainstreams. The People's Survival Fund funds local governments to implement their climate programs. And so this is another important piece of legislation where we institutionalize DRR, or disaster risk reduction. I should speed up because we only have 10 minutes and we have many other people who will speak. So I've given you a rundown of my laws, and the next one, I think, the NEPA is one of my favorite. It institutionalizes and does into law the protected areas, 94 protected areas from Cordilleras to Tawi-Tawi, including the Panay protected area in my home province of Antique. Okay, after the NEPAs. So what am I trying to say? The entire planet is under a climate emergency. And yesterday, upon the chairmanship of Congressman Chato of Bohol, who chairs the Climate Change Commission in the House of Representatives, we approved a resolution declaring a climate emergency. And what does it mean? We've actually failed. And this pandemic really shows that we are in the midst of a climate emergency. We are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a health emergency brought about by our infringement or abuse of nature. And so what are the other issues here? It's been talked about. Global warming will go beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. This was mentioned many decades ago, and they said, what does it mean? So we see that the health afflictions we're feeling now is connected to the global emergency and global warming that we're talking about. The raging COVID-19 pandemic has brought out the sobering reality that the world, it may be advanced, we may be progressive, but it is not as resilient as we think. Our societies, our economic systems are very fragile. We've mishandled and abused it. And so we've seen our vulnerabilities, we've seen our hazards, and we must improve on the way we live and we think, and not go back to how we were before this. So I believe, and I would like to seek your opinion as well, to me, returning to normal is never an option. Do we want dark skies? Do we want polluted air? Do we want heavy traffic? Do we want cough? Do we want starvation? Do we want sickness? Do we want floods? Do we want death? We don't want to go back to how it was before. But where do we want to go? Well, we have the Better Normal piece of legislation, not yet a law. It's still open to improvement. A law is never perfect. And so it has passed on third reading, but there's still the Senate and there's still the bicameral conference. But we were able to introduce many biodiversity, climate, nature, environment, and health standards. And safety measures and protocols are included in this measure. And hopefully, with the discovery of a vaccine, eventually this bill has a sunset clause, and hopefully it's not needed anymore. But the good provisions here, especially those relating to new sustainable pathways, protecting our biodiversity, reinstating or reminding the implementation of all the environmental laws I just mentioned, why should we ignore it? We should continue that even after the discovery of a vaccine, because it details all the impositions which are good for us. It also strengthens the synergy between our national and local governments and the private sector as well in the better normal. Okay, I only have 10 minutes. So we need, of course, a very strong broadband plan from the DICT. That's really a challenge in this country, and that's something we need to do. I just have to speed up on the bill because I was warned I only have 10 minutes to go. So it deals with the issues on water supply and on sanitation and waste management. And it also, of course, protects our vulnerable sector from the affliction of COVID-19. And adaptation is so important, especially for our farmers. You see, those were photos of farmers in Panay a couple of years ago. We must also green the budget, as we've put in special provisions in the past years on how to make it a more resilient and climate adaptive budget. And so it's imperative that we study this so that we will no longer act to the way we were before the pandemic, so that we will have a low emissions and climate resilient and sustainable future. How do we get there? There are 10 local adaptation solutions for community resilience to climate change. Harvesting rainwater, I already mentioned that. That's for households, for communities, for schools. That's very important that we do that, because rainwater harvesting is an alternative source of water. When there is drought, we can mitigate the flooding, and the harvested rainwater can be used for potable consumption as well. Actually, there is already a law, 1989. Let's simply implement it, micromanage, micro-implement to the household level. There are many LGUs that actually do it. Now, this is one of my favorite. Look at that. In our Stories for a Better Normal on Thursday next week, we will have another special edition on food gardens, on rooftop gardens, on vertical gardens, on edible landscapes for food self-sufficiency and sustainability. And I cannot identify all the outstanding local governments on rainwater collector. I guess we need another episode for this, because there's so many adaptation measures that need to be discussed. Roadside ditches to mitigate floods. You see the pictures, that's self-explanatory. And so harnessing our renewable energy sources, whether it is for a school, it is for a small home, or for industry, that's very, very important, because we lessen the impact on the environment by transitioning to renewable energy, and at the same time, we lessen our payment to our electricity distributor. It is actually very simple. Again, there are outstanding LGUs on this. Reducing waste to zero by recycling and using or refusing single-use plastics. I have a pending bill on no to single-use plastic. If you can actually use recyclable materials, those extra blankets or old curtains that can be made into eco bags, or even plastic containers that can be recycled into eco bags. There's much, much more. Perhaps what we could do is have 130 minutes simply on adaptation practices. We go to the next, because there are 5 more. Bamboo is a very important carbon sequesterer. It protects slopes, It is anti-landslide, and it's also a source of livelihood. I'm so happy that my home province of Antique has many bamboo forests, and we have a University of Antique partnership with the DTI, Department of Trade, that will have a bamboo village and actually have equipment to help our local farmers who plant bamboo to do their own bamboo projects. Those are mangroves which protect our coastal ecosystems. I think this was taken a few years ago in Nasugbu. These were newly planted bamboos um, by the women in this municipality in Batangas. And there are many, many more. It's the Bakawan project of Vice Governor Calizo and Governor Miraflores in Aklan is beautiful. We also have a Bakawan sanctuary in Magaba in Antique as well. Okay, number 8, adaptation. Oh, promoting our climate field schools. Next time we will have Mayor Coro, who is one of the recipients of the People's Survival Fund, so that he can tell us and show us what is a climate field school. We will have one 30-minuter only on climate field schools so that we will tune in all local governments, all 1,600 or perhaps all 42,000 barangays to have climate field schools. They have seedling banks. They teach the farming communities innovations. They even use indigenous knowledge so that these climate field schools will know the risk. They know the natural hazards. They implement early warning systems. And there are many, many more. Here, knowing local risk to natural hazards. The province of Albay is a pioneer when it comes to DRR. My colleague, Congressman Joey Salceda, is one of those who started it in Albay. It was one of the first LGUs to use a climate simulation model, and it also conducts training. So it's important to also build capacity of our local communities to prepare and to respond to these climate and health risks. What do I mean? We must go as local as possible. What does it mean? The Purok system. It's not even provinces only or cities or municipalities and barangays. It is going down to a system or a village smaller than a village. And that's called the Purok, the sitio, to build capacity. Wow. These are the 10 adaptation programs, and my time is up. What do? I have to extend. It's World Environment Day. So after having said the 10 adaptation plans, let us now hear from those who have comments, and I can answer any comments from those who have actually texted me. We have messages from our friends. Let us listen now.
I wish to receive your response to 2 questions. The first one, the level of preparedness of the community to disaster risk reduction and climate change is very important. To what extent is this being done through the integrated role of traditional environmental knowledge? The second one is the integration of various sectors, that is organizational development, health, and disaster management, does accelerate the pace of strengthening community resilience. So what steps are you taking for integration of various sectors? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was Mannava Sivakumar of the World Meteorological Organization. Local and indigenous environmental knowledge offer a foundation for disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. Indigenous communities are attentive to environmental variability. They have coping strategies to deal with unstable environments and are already adapting to climate change. It is important that such knowledge is documented for future practice. And recovering from the pandemic requires, as you say, a whole of society approach to address the vulnerabilities of health, education, agriculture, labor, industry, arts and culture, tourism. And I believe that some of the pending legislation in Congress could address these issues. I know that we have other comments or from Rosa, Perez, and Rodel, Lasco. May we have the others as well? And I have questions on Facebook now.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are seeing the convergence of global scale challenges, climate change, and now the pandemic. And it looks like the way to address these planetary scale challenges is to look at it from a systems perspective, looking at it holistically so that we don't adapt to one challenge and maladapt to another challenge. So I wonder if you have any comments or thoughts on this, that we need now more than ever to be more systems or holistic in our thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rodel Lasco. We've been working with him for many, many years, more than a decade. Of course, I completely agree. And as I said earlier, we cannot solve the problems by using the same kind of thinking that we used when we created these problems. That is why the approach must be holistic to ensure that our actions from now do not restore the same vulnerabilities that we did before the pandemic, more so spawn new risks and other crises due to climate change. And so in everything we do, we must look back at what were the wrong things we did that spawned this. And we should not repeat it. And in fact, change the way we used to do things. So it doesn't, okay, we have now Helena Valdes. Hello, Helena. Yes.
I really want to ask you to provide some advice to national policymakers on how to make communities using the opportunity of the post-COVID times to build back better. And how can we, the international community, be useful and helpful to raise awareness, to promote local leadership, and to implement these acts?
Thank you very much. That was Helena. Helena is our friend from way back who heads the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. So the only way is to really heed science and to ensure that our actions from now on do not restore the same vulnerabilities, as I told Dr. Lasco. And we must not spawn new risks. The international community should support through technology, through best practices, through finance and capacity building to help our local economy transition towards a green economy. So as we rebuild the economy during and after the pandemic, our rebuilding must be towards a sustainable, resilient, and green economy and not spawn the new risks. We will listen now to Salvano.
Challenges of sustainable development, which are many, we need to gradually build team efforts to address them jointly in a positive and constructive manner. So here's my question. How can we motivate and facilitate such educational effort in a specific country such as Philippines to become a model for other countries?
Thank you very much. You know, Salvano was one of the first who supported me in my work with the United Nations in 2007, along with Feng Min Khan of the UNISDR, who has since retired, and Manny de Guzman, who was with WMO, I think, at the time. Well, Salvano, regarding your question, yes, the youth are our active partners. And that's the reason why even in the Better Normal Bill, just last night, we included a very special provision of the Kabataan Party List Congresswoman on the active participation of our youth in the student councils, in the student regents, and in the pandemic response. But it goes beyond pandemic response. The youth are the most active partners in challenging development norms, policies in governance, and environmental leadership. That's why the integration of environmental and climate change education in the Philippine school curriculum is so important. We need to nourish these young minds and foster qualities of environmental stewardship. I think earlier we saw that one of the laws that we were mentioning had the Environmental Education Awareness Act, and the strict implementation of this is so, so important. Then we hear now from another friend who has been helping us, Matthew McKinnon of the Climate Vulnerable Forum.
What more do you think could be done so that other environmental champions would step forward in more countries around the world? What more do you think could be done?
Oh, yes, I agree with you. These are extraordinary times requiring extraordinary responses to global problems, increasingly becoming more complex and more daunting. And you're correct. Champions could actually create networks. There was one time in Sendai, I think in 2015, when the UN DRR champions, including the now managing director of the World Bank, had come together along with SG Ban Ki-moon, and we discussed on how we could propel or push disaster risk reduction in parliaments. But during this pandemic, perhaps an online webinar, Matthew, of champions could be created, networks could be created, and forge deeper interactive partnerships with other champions or leaders in various sectors, include the youth, include the vulnerable sectors, to reach out and to influence decision makers across and beyond continents. And I know that Christiana Figueres of the Global Optimism group and her Climate 2020, of course, my dear friend Al Gore of the Climate Reality have been doing this as well. But going even beyond these big names, other champions can be put together. And so because of your suggestion, Matthew, I will take you up on that after this, and I'm 8 minutes over time. We can have a webinar. We can proceed now. So there's another question from Dr. Rosa Perez, one of the most important thinkers and scientists of the Philippines, who was with the IPCC with Vice President Al Gore. The question of Rosa is, will I read it myself? The pandemic has an unprecedented test of our government. It compounds the risks. Yes, what should the policy directions and actions of the Philippine government be in addressing the COVID-19 crisis at the time to reduce the impact of climate threats? You're very correct. As we attack the crisis of the health crisis, the pandemic, we should also take into consideration our tracks towards climate resilience. So it is not one or the other. And that is the reason why in the better normal measure, we've tried to improve it to include climate adaptation, mitigation, disaster risk reduction, even biodiversity protection, even sustainable mobility, and many more. And in fact, after this, since it was passed on third reading, I will ask the experts who are with me today on World Environment Day to study the third reading version of the House so that it can further be improved in the Senate. And so we have, oh, Christiana is with us, and she posed a question. The countries of Europe and the European Union have green and inclusive recovery packages. And would a path like that be an unaffordable luxury for the Philippines? Or what do you see as the potential path, and what does the path look like for citizens, for business and government? Oh, Christiana, thank you for that. No, it is not an unaffordable luxury. In fact, it is not a luxury because it is more expensive not to adapt. It is more expensive not to abide by the laws of nature. It is time to step back, to pause. It is time to follow our environmental laws. Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Ecological Solid Waste Management Law, Environmental Education Awareness Act, Protected Areas Act, Renewable Energy Law, People Survival Fund, and many more that I mentioned. It is not an unaffordable luxury, it is mandatory for our own survival. Okay, I have placed on record some of the questions and the video of many of my colleagues and friends that I have been working with for many, many years. And I'd like to say hello to our viewers. Here we have viewers from Samar, from Quezon City, from Marikina, for the Philippine State College of Aeronautics, San Jose, Antique, Makilala, Cotabato. And there are questions here. Let me see. Sanctions for LGUs not following 9003. Yes. What is 9003? That is the Ecological Solid Waste Management Law. That law has been there since 2001. And people really must segregate waste at source, recycle, and compost. That question was from Gianna Adesas. Charlie Balagtas, good morning, Kong Loren. Is it possible to introduce a piece of legislation requiring state universities to install facilities that will harvest rainwater? Yes, that's already in the law since 1989. And so perhaps in the new norm or better normal bill, I reiterated the importance of rainwater collectors. So we can reiterate it again and again and again. It's already a law, but thank you for that, Charlie Balagtas. Sara Escario, why is climate change called by media as a climate emergency? It is not just the media that calls a climate emergency. This is a word that has been used many, many years ago because it's not just climate change. It's an emergency. It's similar to a pandemic because of the floods, the deaths, the destruction, the droughts that have been caused by extreme weather events and climate. There's also a question here on what happened to the Semirara investigation. I will post on my Facebook page. I think it's already posted the letter that I wrote, Semirara Corp, and the answer that they did, and my letter to DOE and DILG as well. And there's no time to answer this very long question, but we will have another episode for that. I wish I could answer all your questions, but I said it will be a 30-minute conversations with me. Since I noticed that you seem to be interested in the environment, in nature, in climate, perhaps we can do part 2 of Conversations with a Champion. And I would like you to post on Facebook. If you listened, and you did, look at the 10 adaptation plans. Rainwater harvester, edible garden, yung mga simple lang. Can you post what you have done? Whether you are from Antique, or from Samar, or from Quezon City. If you are an SUC, State University, and you've done rainwater harvesters, show us. So we would like to see your feedback, then we can feature it in the next conversations. And perhaps in the next, we can have the youth leaders, we can have women leaders, we can have indigenous persons, we can have those coming from the arts and culture, we can have the differently abled, except that now we don't have time because I have session at 10 a.m. and they're looking for me. And so, we can actually file an amendment to to our laws based on your suggestions. So in closing, and I hate to close, because when you speak about the environment on World Environment Day, 45 minutes is never, ever enough. I'm so grateful for all our friends from the international climate work who have joined us, whether through their questions or their video, and all of those texting me from Antique, Quezon City, Samar, and other places. So we will probably do a part two. I have lots of work. So we realize that these are exceptional times in which nature is sending us a message. What is this message? To care for ourselves. To care for ourselves, we must care for the environment. We must care for nature. It's time to wake up and not go back to what we were before, to the same hazards, risks, and vulnerabilities and everything we did wrong. It's time to take notice, to raise our voices, time to, what they say, build back better, but I would rather say to build a better normal. Time for people and planet to take charge, to make sure we do not abuse. Instead, we conserve, we preserve, we protect, and we live in harmony with nature. Let me just close by saying, on World Environment Day, let us be kind. Let us be kinder to each other as human beings. Let us be kinder to each other, kinder to our community, kinder to the environment, kinder to nature. And as we do that, nature in turn will be kinder to us. It's time for nature. I thank all of you for your engagement. I thank all of you for joining me in our conversation. Any little step, no matter how small, and after this, plant a tree, plant a seedling, plant a vegetable, save a seed. Every step begins with the first little step. Even saving a seed can help save the environment if all the billions of people in this world would actually do that. This is Loren Legarda, thanking you for joining me on World Environment Day. Just send me your messages on Facebook related to what we discussed today, showing me what you have done for adaptation, what you want us to do, what are your suggestions, or any questions relevant to our conversations with a champion which just ensued today. Thank you so much. Happy World Environment Day. Thank you to the Climate Change Commission for coming up with this session today. Thank you to all my staff in the House of Representatives, despite our late night. And thank you to our friends from the global international community and from the academe and science and all those who are still sending messages on Facebook. And so let me just see. Oh yes, you won't lose me. On Thursday at 10 a.m. next week, we will have the continuation of Stories for a Better Normal. And we will have, I think, more of the urban gardens and edible spaces. Oh, we have a request here to ask for part 2 of conversations. Okay, so we have the Stories for a Better Normal every Thursday at 10 a.m. And Vin Rafia, thank you very much. She says it's very educational, full of enlightenment on preserving the environment. Yes, so much work, but I'd love to hear from you. But next time, I will not talk too much. Show me your adaptation practices. Segregation of waste at source, MRF, plants, whichever. Never ending. Happy World Environment Day. Have a good day. Isang luntiang Pilipinas sa ating lahat. Durugid nga salamat, palangga ko kamo sa akon mga kasimanwa sa Antique. At